Insatisfeito com o trabalho de alto executivo na Microsoft, uma das maiores empresas do mundo, o norte-americano John Wood tirou a gravata e trocou o escritório com ar-condicionado pelas montanhas do Nepal. Seu objetivo de vida virou ajudar crianças carentes a aprender a ler e escrever. John Wood criou uma ONG que já construiu mais de 300 escolas, 3.000 bibliotecas e arrecadou mais de 3 milhões de livros para 7 países da Ásia. Conheça agora como um sonho pode se tornar realidade.
So my book is titled Leaving Microsoft to Change the World. And the nice thing is that I grabbed that title for my book before Bill Gates could grab it for his book, because Bill Gates is going to leave Microsoft in 2008 to dedicate himself full-time to philanthropy. So it's becoming more and more common that business people are either leaving their careers to work on philanthropy and social justice issues, or they're at least carving some of their time out, or companies are becoming more responsible for corporate social responsibility initiatives. My own journey to leave Microsoft, to devote myself full-time to starting an ONG, an NGO, and focusing on developing world education is a story that I tell in this book. I never expected to be doing what I am doing now. I grew up as a child in a family that stressed the importance of education, the importance of reading. My father was the only one of 7 children to go through university. And the only reason he went through university was because the government had a scholarship program for soldiers returning from the Second World War. And in one decision, one scholarship for our own family, my own family used education as a ticket out of poverty. My father grew up in a very lower class household with an alcoholic father, but through going through high school, going through university, and then my mother going through high school and a couple of years of university, we grew up in a household that always stressed the importance of reading and education. I did not know that I would end up devoting my life to education. I joined Microsoft in 1991 after finishing my MBA. The years of the 1990s were very fast growth years for technology. They were very fast growth years for Microsoft. And for me, I was taking a lot of international assignments. I've always loved travel. And to me, my idea of bliss or my idea of nirvana would be to travel, but to travel with Bill Gates paying for all of my credit card bills and traveling around the world doing business. What really struck me when I lived overseas, and I went overseas with Microsoft in 1995 and was covering mainland China, covering Southeast Asia, doing work throughout Singapore, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand. Spent a lot of my time traveling. And what always struck me was that in different parts of Asia, you had absolutely the most developed living standards in the world in places like Hong Kong and Singapore and Tokyo, where you had a GNP per person equal to that of Switzerland. You had very little disease. You had long life expectancy. But then on the doorstep of these places, you had absolute abject poverty. You had people's life expectancy being 42, 43 years age. You had women dying during childbirth in unprecedented numbers. You had people dying of diseases nobody should have to die of in this modern world. Mumps, rubella, smallpox, malaria. And this was all side by side. It's really that way throughout the world, unfortunately. Prosperity lives side by side with poverty everywhere. In my own country, you have some of the highest standards of living in the world, and you have some of the lowest standards of living in the world. Throughout, I'm sure you may have seen that in places in South America where you have prosperity, but you have prosperity living side by side with poverty. In my mind, a lot of that comes down to education. Education is the best proven ticket out of poverty. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. But let me first go back to my personal journey. In 1998, I made my first trip to Nepal. Nepal, have any of you been to Nepal? I would encourage you all at some point in your life to go. Yeah, you liked it? Yeah, fantastic place. Beautiful mountains, beautiful people, Buddhist, Hindu, very spiritual, yet one of the poorest countries in the world, one of the 20 poorest countries in the world. People living on average on $1 a day. Illiteracy rates are 70%. And those two things are linked together. Illiteracy leads to poverty. But unfortunately, if a country is mired in poverty, they don't have enough money to educate all their children. So it's this never-ending cycle. When I went to Nepal in 1998, I met a gentleman, and I'll test our translator here, a gentleman named Pasupati Neopani. I guess that doesn't need to translate. I guess it's the same in both languages. Mr. Pasupati Neopani came up to me on the side of the trail. I was doing an 18-day trek, an 18-day walking trek in Nepal. Just blissful. 28,000-foot mountains, 200 miles of walking, 18 days with no cars, no roads, no email, no cell phones, no newspapers. All you had was your backpack and your books and just this blissful experience of being out in the Himalayas. Mr. Pasupati came up to me on the side of the trail as I was drinking tea. And he introduced himself, and he asked me what I did, and I told him I was working for Microsoft, and what do you do? And he said, I'm the district resource person for the education department. We have 17 schools in this province. And I looked down at his shoes, and his shoes were just beaten up. They had holes in them. They were held together with duct tape. And I realized that for him, when he said he was going between all 17 of the schools, it meant he was literally walking from school to school to school. He was so dedicated to his schools. But he spoke a sentence that was very sad. He said, I am the district resource person, but I have no resources. And he invited me to come see his school the next day in a little village called Bahundanda. It was a 2-hour walk from where we were. And I was excited to see the village in Bahundanda because I thought that this would be a chance to see the real Nepal, not the trekker tourist version of Nepal. I got to go see a school. I was very excited. So the next day I woke up and I was drinking my tea, and Mr. Pasupati came down, and he was probably about 70 years old. He didn't say much. He was very, very quiet. We walked for several hours to this school, and we walked up this very, very steep mountain pass for about an hour and a half towards the end, and just winding up this series of switchbacks. And there were donkeys, and there were porters, and there were Nepali people who have very, very powerful legs going up the hill. And at the top of the hill, we got to the school. And the school was like nothing I'd ever seen before, because the conditions in which the children were learning were absolutely destitute. The walls were made of, mud and straw, and they had a sheet metal roof, and it leaked when it rained, and they had a dirt floor, and they had a chalkboard that probably, was the size of this book. But they had about 80 kids in the room. And so imagine, if you are on the back of this room, imagine trying to, be in a room that's dark and being able to see the chalkboard that far away. And they were turning children away because they had no more room in the school. They had 450 kids in this very, very small set of rooms. They had no desks. The children were balancing their notebooks on their small little knees. And the headmaster, as he gave me the tour, said, well, you have to come see the school's library. And I got really excited to go see the school's library. How many of you grew up as kids loving books? Okay, about a quarter of you. I grew up, okay, now a third of you. Now that you realize it's audience participation. I grew up loving books. So I got really excited to go see the school's library and it turned out I was naive. And, I'm sure that's a big surprise that there was a naive American person overseas. But I was a bit naive, and I thought that this school library would be full of kids reading books with big smiles on their faces. And we got to the library, and in reality, it was just this empty room. It was a room where theoretically a library could have existed, but they had no desks, they had no chairs, they had no shelving, and most importantly, they had no books. And I did not want to ask this rather impertinent, obnoxious question, but I had to. I said, Thank you for showing me the library. It is very beautiful. But where exactly are your books? And the headmaster pointed to a cabinet that had a padlock on it where the books were locked up. And he said, the books are precious. We have so few of them. We do not want the children to harm them. And when they found the teacher who had the key to the padlock, they opened the thing up and they had probably 20 books. Now they had 450 children. So being, really good at math, I realized that was a very bad ratio of books to schools, 20 books, 450 students. But more importantly was the quality of the books. These were not books that were appropriate for children. These were books that backpackers and trekkers had thoughtfully left behind. And I'm no literary snob. I think every child should read Danielle Steele romance novels at some point of their educational development. And of course every kid loves Umberto Eco and Günter Grass and Hermann Hesse and these big, thick German novels. But these books were not appropriate for children at all. And for me, this one moment encapsulated everything I'd experienced in the last 5 years living in Asia, of a poor community not being able to afford education, but until it had education, the risk was that it would always remain poor. And actually, chapter 1 of my book is titled, "Perhaps, Sir, you will someday come back with books." That was the headmaster's very simple request. Perhaps you will someday come back with books. And in my own mind, I got very excited because I pictured coming back to this rural village. I pictured renting a yak. In the Himalayas, everything's carried on yaks and donkeys. And so I thought I'd come back with so many books that I would need to have yaks and donkeys to carry them all. And I told the headmaster I would come back one day. And one of the teachers was very skeptical. And the teacher said, many people come through our village. Many backpackers, many Westerners, British citizens, Canadians, Americans, they come through and we ask them for help. And they tell us they will help us. But nobody ever comes back. Nobody comes back. And I said, I will be different. I will come back. Within 1 year, I will come back. And I got really excited about the idea. And the headmaster got me really even more excited because the headmaster said, when our children see you coming back with books, their heads will hit the ceiling because they will be jumping up and down with excitement. So that was my image. Children jumping up and down with excitement. Me, the yak. I'll give the story away. I do go back with the yak. You see it on the cover of the book. And I felt like in Buddhist thought, and I was reading the teachings of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, while traveling. And in Buddhist thought, you are told that if you have a lot of money, that doesn't make you a good person. What you do with that money makes you a good person. Or it doesn't make you a good person if you keep all that money to yourself and you get greedy about it. So I was thinking, okay, I've made some money at a young age from Microsoft stock. I can do something for this village. So I did the book drive. Sent mail to friends around the world and said, you must help. Much like you're doing a book drive here for your 6 libraries you support. Similar thing. Grassroots effort, direct action, starting out very, very small. So I did the book drive. We collected about 3,000 books in the first month. I will never forget the day we walked back into the village of Bahundanda. I stopped by the side of the trail before going back up this steep series of switchbacks. We had 8 donkeys loaded with books. 8 donkeys. And I was on the side of the trail getting a drink of water from the stream. And there was a gentleman there, a Nepali gentleman. And I said to him, Namaste, Kasto Cha, which is Nepali for hello, how are you? And he said, today, sir, I am very happy. There is somebody coming to our village with books for our children. The children are out in the forest. They are picking flowers to welcome him. We do not know where he is from. We think he is from Holland. And I don't know if they thought the books would be in Dutch. But regardless, I explained to him who I was and that my father was with me and we were delivering books to the children. We walked up to the village, and when we got there, I'll never forget the scene because 450 students, the same students I had seen the year before, were lined up. They were in a corridor, 2 lines. We walked through the middle, and as we walked through the middle, every child was saying, Namaste, sir, Namaste, Namaste. Namaste is a Buddhist term that means I salute the God within you. Beautiful saying. Every child was lined up in age order, youngest to oldest. And by the end of the line, we could have opened a flower shop because we had marigold garlands around our necks. We had been handed flower petals. Our hands were overflowing with flowers. And when we got to the end of the line, we took the books off the donkeys and opened up the canvas bags. And these children just stage dived. They just jumped on top of the books. They were so excited. There was chaos, absolute chaos. It was anarchy. And these kids were grabbing the books, and they were so excited, and they were looking, and their eyes got so wide open, and the smiles on their faces. To me, it was incredible to witness the first time these children had seen African wildlife before. Giraffes and elephants and zebras and hippos. They were looking at pictures of sharks and starfish and the ocean. They were looking at pictures of the solar system. And in my mind, something really changed that day, because I realized that as much as this made me feel very, very good, that I had had this one experience of helping one village and 450 children, there were 800 million people throughout the world lacking basic literacy. And so I thought about, would I leave Microsoft? Would I leave Microsoft and devote the rest of my life to this momentous decision? Would I have the courage to leave Microsoft and devote the rest of my life to bringing the gift of education to kids throughout the poorest countries of the world? And in the book, I talk about that decision of leaving. I did leave. I started an Onge Room to Read, which is now 8 years old. And it has grown more rapidly than we ever thought. We're now in 8 countries throughout the poorest parts of Asia, places like India, Cambodia, Vietnam, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Laos. We're in Southern Africa, in both South Africa and Zambia. And we have taken what I learned in the business world and tried to apply that to the social sector, of saying big problems demand big solutions, bold goals demand bold people. So the Onge I started Room to Read, we've had a goal from day one. We have now put 2.8 million books in the hands of kids. We'll be at 4 million books by the end of this year. We are publishing books in local languages that have never had children's books. So this is a Nepali book called Tami Tempo. It is about a little tuk-tuk, one of those little 3-wheel vehicles, and it's a cartoon character. This is written by local authors and local artists so that kids see literature from a young age that's culturally relevant. This is another Nepali book, Kameli Kobasna, about a little girl who becomes obsessed with her mother's jewelry and neglects her studies to ill effect. This is a Khmer language book from Cambodia called The Smart Student, about a girl who excels at studies and academics, so it's setting very positive gender role models in a country where often the girls are overlooked. So we've opened a number of libraries. We've opened to date, we call them reading rooms. They're bilingual, local language plus whatever the second language is of the government, which in the case of Asia and Africa is usually English. We have opened 3,600 reading rooms. This year we're going to open 1,500 reading rooms. So we'll be at 5,000 reading rooms by the end of this year. This year on average we're opening a new reading room every 6 hours, somewhere in the developing world. So literally by the time between the time you go to bed and the time you wake up, we'll open a new library. Between the time you eat lunch and the time you eat dinner, we will open a new library. So you could fly across Brazil, and in that time that you're flying across Brazil, we're going to open a new library. So we're very excited about that, because our goal is to open 20,000 reading rooms for the year 2020. 5,000 by the end of this year, 10,000 by the end of 2010, 20,000 by the end of 2020. Very, very bold goal. But we're excited about it because when you take that little village of Bahundanda and think about those 450 kids, and then you project it forward 15 or 20 years in the future, this will be the first generation in many of these countries to grow up with proper schools, with teachers, with a proper bilingual library, and with equal access for the girls, because we have a long-term scholarship program to make sure that the girl child is not overlooked. We will have about 4,000 girls in the program by the end of this year. And so we're trying to make sure that in addition to schools and libraries, we have equal access for girls. So I think I'll stop there. There's a lot of stories in the book. I talk about being a social entrepreneur, leaving the corporate world and the pressures and the financial pressures. There was such a tug, because I was brought up to believe that you go out and you get educated and you find a great career and you climb to the top of the corporate ladder and you make lots of money and you have the job and the title and the status. And, at least in the United States, when you go to a dinner party, the first thing people ask you is, what do you do? And, it's like, I'm the director of business development for Microsoft's Greater China region. And people are like, wow, yeah. And you exchange business cards. And they think you're a serious player. And I was then going to start saying, well, I deliver books on the back of a yak to rural Himalayan villages. And then people were going to look at me like I was crazy. And all of a sudden at age 34, I no longer have the status. So it was challenging to leave. People told me I was crazy. I had people tell me that, oh, you're just having a midlife crisis. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be a crisis if I didn't follow my passion and instead just thought that age 35 my path was set and I had to work at Microsoft for 30 more years. So it took several months, but I eventually one day walked into work and I just said, you know what, today is the day. Today is the day. Drank a big cup of coffee, walked into my boss's office and said, I quit, I'm leaving. So for me, the dilemma was that I left Microsoft with enough money in my bank account that I could not have to draw a salary from the NGO. But I didn't have enough money that I could actually fund the projects. So I had to be fundraising from day one. And we would only grow Room to Read quickly if I was successful at fundraising. And that was a challenge because, nobody really likes asking for money. Hey, can I have your credit card? Give me some money. It's not the favorite. Nobody's favorite part of the job is asking for money. So I had to make it easy on myself to do so. And the number one way that I made it easy on myself was giving people a direct, tangible idea of what they would fund. I would show them a picture of a village that needed a school, give them the exact price that school would cost, promise them photographs, promise them they could go visit the village on the day the school opened, and to create a direct link between what was given and what was done. And that's very important because many times in the charity world or the Onge world, these organizations say, well, we're doing good work, so therefore you should give us money. But donors, and especially business leaders, and especially corporations, are skeptical because they want to know exactly where the money is going to go. The world has thrown away tens of billions of dollars on badly designed aid projects. Some of these government-to-government transfers of billions of dollars, the money never reaches the little people, the little children who need it most. So we had to create a direct link, a direct model. And so we basically have everything we do at Room to Read, and on our website at roomtoread.org, we literally publish a price list. It's almost like a menu that you see at dinner. You can order this, but it costs you this. We literally list out the price of a school, the price of a school library, the price of a girl's scholarship, and give people that direct link. What we are doing at Room to Read, first is we try to design things well from the beginning to make sure that the community is very, very engaged. We call it the Challenge Grant. The Challenge Grant, and it's translated into different languages. It's a different phrase in Vietnamese and a different phrase in Khmer. But the Challenge Grant requires the communities to co-invest in each project. If we're building a reading room, the parents have to come in on the weekend and they will paint the walls a very bright, child-friendly color. They will lay the flooring that's in a child-friendly way. They will pick up hammers and they will help to build shelves. They will help with transporting the books from the nearest road to the rural village. When we build a school, the parents are required to donate labor, to donate land. Many times they donate small amounts of money. So from the very beginning, it is a community project. From the very beginning, we tell them that Room to Read will turn over the ownership of that project to the community. So it's designed in from the start to be sustainable. And then secondly, we do monitoring and evaluation. So we go back to the school Frequently, we go back to the libraries frequently just to see how things are going. Are the teachers showing up? Are the books being checked out? Are the children checking into the library and reading the books? If you see that the books are pristine, you know, there's no handprints on them, then you know something's wrong. The books should have dirt on them. The books should be bent up a little bit. Children need to love the books. So we do a lot of monitoring to make sure that those resources are being utilized. And if they're not, we just try to find out why not, what's wrong, what can we do. The teachers aren't showing up. Okay, we're going to go back to the capital city. We're going to take a meeting with the Ministry of Education, and we're going to protest and say, we built this school, and you assured us teachers would be there. These things do go wrong. Things always go wrong. We all know that. The key is not to deny that something may go wrong. The key is to monitor it, to evaluate it, and then to admit it to yourself, and then if there's a problem, you fix it. Capitalism is here to stay. Capitalism is sweeping the world. Even communist governments are embracing capitalism. Mainland China has been growing at 9, 10, 11% per annum for the last 2 decades. Vietnam, one of the last communist countries in the world, has heavy foreign direct investment. Very, very fast economic growth. I don't think capitalism can be stopped. So I think what we have to ask ourselves is, how can capitalism move in a benign direction? How can we have the best of both worlds? How can we use capitalism to produce incredible wealth, yet use that wealth to a larger purpose, and use that wealth as a ticket out of poverty? Because the problem with capitalism is it's difficult for somebody to have faith in capitalism if their child is malnourished, if their child is not inoculated, if their village does not have clean water. How can anybody living in poverty believe that capitalism is a good thing? So capitalism has succeeded at creating incredible wealth, but it's failed at alleviating the suffering of over 1 billion people across the poorest parts of the world. So what I hope I'm doing by my speeches and my book and through Room to Read's work and my team doing such great work is to send a signal to the rich people of the world and the rich companies of the world to say, if you make money, you have the obligation to give back. If you're making so much money as a company, put some money back. We have gotten amazing support from some of the world's largest companies for Room to Read. Goldman Sachs, Credit Suisse, Scholastic, Microsoft, Google, Cathay Pacific, Accenture, ING Bank. We are going to the businesses to say, look, Room to Read is run like a business, therefore you can feel comfortable giving us money, you'll know that you'll have a good result from it. And my hope would be that we raise about 60% of our money from high net worth individuals, mostly business executives and entrepreneurs. Again, I'm trying to be an example of those people to say, I've sacrificed. Charmaine, one of my employees, Room to Read, who's in the first row, could be making a lot more money in the private sector as a Harvard Business School graduate than she's making working for Room to Read. But we're both examples of that, of saying to the rich people of the world, you have to give back. You have to prove that you have compassion along with capitalism. You have to prove that you don't just have prosperity, that you have prosperity with a purpose. And so far, so good. This year we're going to raise about $15 million, and we're going to work with about 1,600 villages across the developing world. So my hope is to basically use the power of that wealth creation mechanism, but divert the money as much as we can into the ticket out of poverty for the poor.